Is that about right? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Joe. I think you've slightly overstated my career, but thanks a lot. I worked for Peter Sutherland, whose favourite phrase was to say there's no amount of flattery that I cannot consume with equanimity, so I will borrow that from him today. It's a great pleasure to be back here in the Glenties. In fact, I was here in 2002 in the debate on Nice 2, so it seems I'm condemned to come back when we have to have a reflection on one referendum looking towards another. But I must say it's a very great pleasure to be here. I'm glad to see that the school goes from strength to strength. And I was here last night for the debate with the Minister of Finance and George Lee and Eamon Gilmore, and it was a packed house, fantastic atmosphere, and I think it's a great tribute to you personally, Joe, and all the organisation that you managed to turn this rather remote part of Ireland into the centre of intellectual and political debate for a couple of days, and it must be a great boost for the region as well. I see the hotel has acquired a splendid new hall as well. When the last time I was here, we spoke in the school. So it's great to be back here on the theme, Does Ireland Need Europe? I thought I was speaking first, but you sprung a surprise on me. So I suppose Lucinda has made some of the points I would make, and Pádraig has taken us rather directly into perhaps tonight's debate. But let me start with what I wanted to try and explain about how I feel about the question, does Ireland need Europe? And then I'll pick up maybe on some of the points Pádraig made in the course of my talk. In 1972, during the referendum campaign for Ireland's accession to the then EC, I was canvassing for the yes vote at the front gate of Trinity College. And a very good friend and a debating partner stopped in surprise when he saw me. We were good friends and we shared many common views about issues of the day. And he said to me, "So you think it was all a waste of time then?" I immediately understood what he was saying. He thought joining the EEC meant Ireland was giving up its hard-won independence. I was shocked, because for me, the direct opposite was true. Joining the EEC as a sovereign European state, separate from the United Kingdom, was the ultimate expression of our independence. I was brought up in a nationalist tradition, very proud of this state and what it represented. And like many people in this room, I lived through the difficult times of the late 60s and the 70s when the struggle in the north revised old animosities and old demons. But I always believed that Ireland needed to reach out past the at times suffocating bilateral relationship with Britain to the wider world, and in particular to continental Europe. For me, we had become independent not just to control our own destiny, but in order to do something with that control. An independent Ireland was there not to opt out of the world, but rather to opt in and bring our distinctive point of view to bear in a meaningful way on the problems of the world. Only in this way, for me, would our independence have true meaning. In the 50s and 60s, the United Nations offered such a platform, skillfully exploited by people like Frank Aiken. We flexed our muscles with a courageous vote about China's eventual membership of the UN. We led the debate on nuclear non-proliferation. And we proudly sent our troops to fight in the Congo and later in Cyprus and the Lebanon in the name of global justice. Joining the EEC was, therefore, the next logical step in the process of Ireland finally taking its place amongst the nations of the earth, as Emmett once dreamed. Of course, none of us could have foreseen exactly what that decision would mean. If anyone had suggested then that 30 years later there would be a fully integrated single market in Europe with a single currency, freedom of movement of people, or that the EEC, now known as the European Union, having already expanded to include the fledgling democracies of Greece, Spain and Portugal, would be opening its doors to the newly liberated countries of Central and Eastern Europe, it would have seemed like an impossible dream. Yet when I was privileged to be present at the extremely moving ceremony at Áras an Uachtaráin on the 1st of May 2004 to mark the 5th and most momentous enlargement of the Union, that dream came true. On that day, I was doubly proud. Proud for what Europe had managed to accomplish through the reunification of the once divided continent, but just as proud for the role that Ireland was playing in the eyes of the world at that history-making event. As I watched the 25 flags of the enlarged Europe unfurl, it struck me that we had truly come such a long way from the rather isolated and insecure country of my youth. Of course, there was the money. The immediate benefit of EEC membership was the protective mantle of the Common Agricultural Policy for our farmers, long locked in the stifling embrace of Britain's cheap food policy. Then came the structural funds. As Lucinda has said, some €62 billion in receipts from the EU budget flowed into Ireland during the years 1973 to 2000. At one point in 1991, it amounted to 7.4% of our GDP. It's all too easy to take this for granted now. But those financial flows provided the platform for the remarkable performance of the Irish economy during the Celtic Tiger years. Of course, Ireland only really began to make the best use of those transfers after we turned around our own economic policies in 1987, as was discussed last night. The lesson of this is also clear. Europe can provide the ingredients of success, but it requires our own efforts to translate it into a winning formula. But the real benefit of membership came from the way it opened Ireland up to the world. And this was true in so many ways. For the civil service, engagement with other administrations in Brussels necessitated a major process of modernisation. This was true not just for the Department of Foreign Affairs, but also for the home departments who suddenly found themselves in regular meetings with colleagues from all over Europe. Students were offered new opportunities for study abroad through the Comet and Erasmus programs. These were so successful that it's now almost commonplace for our students to spend a year in a university outside Ireland as part of their course. European health and safety legislation brought improved conditions for workers. Environmental legislation brought new environmental awareness. Women's rights improved dramatically and started a virtual revolution in the role of women in Irish society. I could go on. Joining the EEC was like opening the doors and windows of a dusty house, and it changed our lives forever. Membership also transformed our relationship with the United Kingdom. It is in some ways ironic that we both entered the EEC precisely at a moment of renewed tension in our bilateral relationship caused by the conflict in the north. I'm profoundly convinced that it was because of our joint membership of the then EEC that we managed to avoid that relationship going wrong. The peace process would always have had its own momentum and its own heroes, but membership of the EEC provided a framework and an incentive to find a peaceful and consensual solution to our common problems. And through EU membership, Ireland's international stature grew also. Membership of the EEC forced us to initiate a policy of official development aid for poor countries, something previously left to charities or missionary orders. Because we were part of the decision-making process in Brussels, people suddenly cared about what Ireland thought about European or global issues. We remained a small country, but one with influence beyond our size. I'm frankly astounded when people talk of the risk that Ireland might lose its identity in the process of European integration. Nothing could be further from the truth. Membership of the EU has given us an enhanced international profile and a new confidence of what it means to be Irish. The bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, everything that this country achieved in order to justify the title of Celtic Tiger, the economic progress, the increased international profile, the enormous boost of self-confidence, the liberation from Britain's shadow, the greater openness and pluralism of all of our society, all of this flowed directly from our engagement with Europe. And only the revisionists of the history of the last 35 years could seek to convince otherwise. And if I may say so, Pádraig, I listened with great interest for your vision of Europe, but I remind myself that the party you represent has consistently opposed every treaty since the day of accession. Opposed. Had we followed your advice back then, none of the benefits which I've described would have come to this country. Now, a cynic might say, okay, we needed Europe back then, but we've grown up now, and we can afford to take a more independent stance. So does Ireland still need Europe? Economically, it is clear that we still benefit hugely from EU membership, as well as from our membership of the Eurozone. Ireland's attractiveness as a destination for foreign direct investment stems directly from our EU membership, which offers a gateway to a market of some 500 million consumers. The Irish economy has been so successful at providing a transatlantic entry point into the EU that by 2007, the stock of foreign direct investment from the US alone was worth 20 billion euros. The recent financial crisis and the recession it has provoked only further reinforce this argument. Without membership of the Eurozone, the former Irish punt would have crashed through the floor, creating a major crisis for this economy, well beyond the crisis we are currently experiencing. As Lucinda mentioned, Irish-based financial institutions are benefiting massively from liquidity provided by the European Central Bank. They're currently receiving around 130 billion euros in ECB loans, about 15% of the total amount made available by the ECB, and it's equivalent to 77% of our GDP. But as we know, the Celtic tiger is now in trouble, and we're going through hard times, and we heard the difficult challenges that we faced debated at length last night. We face an extended period of economic challenges, and the way back will not be easy. But the EU and Eurozone membership are part of the solution and definitely not the cause of the problem. There will be an end to this period of economic pain, and Ireland needs to plan carefully to make a success of the recovery. Here again, EU membership offers many advantages, especially in helping us cope with the challenges of globalization and the growing role of the emerging powers of China, India, and Brazil. When I lived in Japan at the beginning of the 1980s, I became convinced that time was fast running out for the old continent of Europe. I used to spend a lot of time going around schools talking to Japanese school children about Europe. And it's a very humbling experience when you walk into a Japanese classroom, because the map on the wall over the blackboard has the Pacific Ocean at the center. And Europe is in the very far left corner. And I'm afraid, usually, Ireland was under the frame. It was not particularly easy to explain where I came from. But it does give you a very unique perspective of just where we stand in the global economy and in this planet going into the 21st century. I was convinced, therefore, that we had a challenge. The rest of the world was advancing faster than us, and we literally had a race against the clock, initially with Japan, but now with China and India and Brazil and the others who will keep coming. When Jacques Delors said that we had to complete the internal market in order to ensure our economic survival, I knew what he meant. Scale will matter in the 21st century. Small may be beautiful, but believe me, big is better when it comes to trade talks or political influence. In my capacity as a trade negotiator these days, a species I recognize held in the same esteem as used car salesmen or insurance brokers, I have the opportunity to travel the world trying to secure Europe's commercial position in a globalized planet. I've reached the same conclusion now that I did when I worked in Japan. It's time for us to wake up and smell not the coffee, but the green tea, and understand just how challenged Europe's role in the world is. The Lisbon Treaty represents the EU's latest effort to find the delicate balance between equipping ourselves to act together when it is in our best interest, to project ourselves globally, while preserving the identity and the sovereignty of our individual countries. The treaty is not a radical new departure for the EU, but never forget that it is the fruit of 10 years of work. We started this journey in 1999, trying to resolve some unfinished institutional business from the Amsterdam Treaty. We have gone through the Nice Treaty, we have gone through the Convention, we've gone through the Constitution, and we have now arrived at the Lisbon Treaty. Padraig is right to say that many of the elements in the Lisbon Treaty are the same as the Constitution, but it is not the same document. It does not have the same level of ambition, and it is now cast as amendments to the existing treaties rather than being projected as a whole new constitution, which required, and would have required, and let us not forget that the very vibrant debate that Padraig referred to in France and in Holland, often referred to the old bits of the treaties that were going to have to be approved anew in the Constitution. In France, one of the big debates about the Constitution was about competition policy, something which is actually already anchored in the treaties. And that is why it was felt that rather than asking people to endorse a whole new package which accumulated everything that we had done until now, that we would go back and simply amend the treaties to bring in the changes which were deemed necessary to make Europe a more efficient and effective and accountable structure in the 21st century. The treaty is relatively neutral in terms of the EU's policy remit. There are some positive elements, Lucinda mentioned them, the elements of climate change and energy, but the biggest changes are in institutional organization, designed to help us to be more effective and more accountable, particularly now that we're 27 and with the prospect of further enlargements to come. In particular, the creation of a permanent president of the European Council and the merging of the current foreign policy role played by Javier Solana with the post of Vice President of the Commission should help us better articulate our views on the world stage. Member States still retain full control over their foreign policies, but the more we can speak with one voice, the better we can influence global events. It's a very simple statement, but it's true. Now, the traffic has not been all one way. Europe needs Ireland. We brought a very distinctive Irish perspective to the table in Brussels. As a former colony, we're uniquely sensitive to the development needs of the Third World. We have pursued in Europe the commitment to a more just world that we began in the League of Nations and the UN. As an open, free trading economy, we've defended the need for Europe to adopt the same policies. We've defended the need to protect agricultural production in Europe and nurture the rural community. We've been active in promoting workers' rights and a just society. We've staunchly defended the enlargement of the Union to the emerging democracies of Central and Eastern Europe, including opening our doors to their workers when others kept them shut, something that we can be proud of, because sometimes doors were shut to our workers. In all of this, we have been able significantly to influence the policies of the EU internally and externally. In the meetings of the Council of Ministers, we are acknowledged as a voice of reason and compassion, even if occasionally very tenacious in defending certain national interests. Nothing to be ashamed of there. But we earned respect and credibility. We are at risk of losing that. The question is not, as once famously suggested, whether we are closer to Boston than Berlin, and certainly not, to paraphrase the iconic banner of James Connolly's Citizen Army, that we want neither Boston nor Berlin, but rather that we need Berlin and Boston, and furthermore that we will need Beijing and Brazzaville, because the 21st century is not just about what we do in Europe, it's about how we make space for China and India and Brazil, and how we help the poorest countries of the world in Africa and elsewhere find their way forward for prosperity in an otherwise extremely unequal distribution of wealth across this globe, which is ultimately not sustainable. Our struggle for independence was long and bitter, but surely we became independent, not just to control our own destiny, but so that we could contribute to the betterment of the planet. One of our first acts of international engagement under the leadership of Eamon de Valera was to support the League of Nations. We've been a fervent supporter of the UN in the last century. In the 21st century, the best way for Ireland to fulfill that historic destiny is through our active engagement in the European Union, through which we can sit at the highest tables of global decision-making and be sure that our voice actually counts, whether in the debates on climate change, the defense of fundamental rights, or the shaping of the new global economic order that offers the prospect of prosperity for all, coupled with policies that address issues such as poverty, disease, and war. Let us be under no illusion. Our ability to play this role depends crucially on not only on our membership of the EU, but on our credibility and our influence as members. Half-hearted members of any club rarely set the rules or the tone. A second no in the forthcoming referendum, independently of any precise legal consequences, will clearly condemn us to the status of non-playing members. All the more so, since no one can clearly identify any aspect of the Lisbon Treaty which poses a major national problem for Ireland. The guarantees, the legal guarantees, because they are legal decisions of the Council of Ministers, and we have a commitment that they will be turned into protocols at the next possible occasion. The legal guarantees which the government has obtained definitively put to rest the red herring issues which surfaced during the last referendum campaign. It is now absolutely clear that the Lisbon Treaty does not change anything in regard to abortion law, taxation, or neutrality. There will be no European army, and there will be no conscription. So let's put those issues aside. On the issue of Article 48, to just get techie for just a moment, but I have to reply to Porrick, the implication is that somehow the treaty is now self-amending. Of course it's not. There are different procedures foreseen for how you amend it, but all of them come to the same conclusion. Any proposed changes have to be ratified by each member state in accordance with their constitutional requirements. It changes absolutely nothing from the present situation. And as regards the issue of trade, it changes nothing. I don't know how many times I have to say this. I'm the negotiator. I'm there. I know what it means. The WTO, any WTO deal will still have to be approved by unanimity by the Council of Ministers now and under Lisbon. It changes absolutely nothing. Indeed, Lisbon offers many positives in terms of democratic accountability. The role of the European Parliament is strengthened. National parliaments are given new powers to guard against potentially overzealous European legislation. There's even a new citizens' initiative, which gives ordinary people the possibility to influence policy through a petition. On the one issue legally affected by the treaty, the number of commissioners, ratification of Lisbon offers the only legal means possible to secure the continuation of one commissioner per member state. If Lisbon fails, we will no longer be assured of having an Irish member of the Commission. That is the full legal situation. The big picture, therefore, is that we can either play in the Premiership and have real influence, or we can become permanent hurlers on the ditch, free to hold any views we wish, but ultimately irrelevant. Ireland needs Europe, but Europe needs Ireland. The world needs Irish engagement through a Europe that can actually impact on the key decisions that will shape the coming century. My fervent wish is that we will continue to play an active and influential role in the marvellous adventure that is European integration and Europe's influence in the world. When you consider these issues on the 2nd of October, whatever niggling doubts you may have about some issue of legal detail, please remember that what history will record is how this nation positioned itself in response to these global issues. I remain convinced that those who struggled for the independence of this country down the years, that what they would want is that we opt for openness and not reclusion, for engagement and not isolation, for influence and not irrelevance. The choice will be yours. Please think very carefully before you make it. In these extremely unsettled times, Ireland needs above all to send out a positive message, reaffirming our engagement with a Europe that has delivered the transformation of this country in the past and which continues to offer us the best possible prospect of a brighter future. Thank you.